Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. Hopefully, you're not getting snowed in, but most of us are being snowed in here in the US. So, hopefully, this episode gives you something to think about and maybe some recommendations for things to watch while you are hopefully sparing your backs and cuddling up with a nice hot cocoa or maybe a warm brandy. In today's episode, we will be discussing primarily the second, or I should say the third episode of The Pitt, Hour 3, and also briefly discussing Drops of God, the premiere of the second season this very week on Apple TV. I'll be joined in that conversation by my wife, Kim. And by the way, we have already recorded this conversation. And while I was editing, just to do this preamble, I accidentally deleted the entire recording. So we will be recreating that conversation later in this very episode. Although it's the weekend, my wife got called into work. So before she can come back and join me for that recap of those episodes, I'll pad out this episode by giving you my reaction to the Academy Award nominations, if you haven't been following that, and a quick rundown of where you can watch all those films. Some quick show notes, of course. We continue to discuss The Night Manager. We have been discussing Hijack as well, Sona and myself. Hijack, I think now for certain after episode 2 is something that we probably want to binge. So we'll probably take a couple of week break away from that show and then catch you all up on where we're at. It's a relatively short season, but we probably won't be going week to week, maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every 3 weeks. And in the meantime, we still discuss The Night Manager on Apple, I should say on Amazon Prime. Expect a solo episode where I discuss the most recent episode of Industry on HBO Max. Darren is on vacation, but he will be rejoining the podcast later in the week where we can discuss No Other Choice, do a full spoiler breakdown of this film that has been a huge hit, now opening all around the world. This huge box office hit for Park Chan-wook, this master director from South Korea, which to a large extent has popularized this South Korean film renaissance of the past decade or two, and yet was shunned. Here's a spoiler for the results of the Academy Award nominations. Shunned, yes, yet again by the Academy Awards, one of the giant snubs here from this year. And I'll have a lot more to say about that when I get to the breakdown of the nominations, along with my solo recap of this current episode of Industry, which is premiering just tomorrow. I'll also be giving you my opinion of the first 2 episodes of this new Game of Thrones spin-off series, which I think is a really solid and low stakes, in the best possible way, new reintroduction, let's say, into this universe. And I think everybody, with all this giant IP management out there, everybody has to learn from this. Lower stakes stories that put you into a world that everybody loves. Think about the season 1 of The Mandalorian, for example, is probably a very successful thing for everybody to be thinking about. It does not have to be a $1 billion season with all the stakes of that IP universe on the line every single time. It gets exhausting to viewers. It has no handle for new viewers to enter into your universe. And it just fatigues the viewer if every single time the stakes are that high. A huge problem, I think, with all of the IP that's out there right now. And I think this is an encouraging way to imagine a future where a lot of these these properties have been developed over decades can go forward, establish new short stories, lower stake, fun, primarily fun stories within the continuity of that IP universe. And then if you're successful, build on that little by little, build the stakes over time. I think everyone needs to learn from this particular example. And hopefully the makers of Game of Thrones and the HBO powers that be learn from this as well. And I hope the show is successful so that it becomes a template for the future. So I'll give you my opinion of that in more detail in the next episode, and talking about No Other Choice, and continuing our coverage of The Night Manager and The Pitt and Drops of God, and a handful of interesting movies that are coming in the near future as well. It's been really a packed January and pretty high quality, I have to say. A lot of these projects are B projects, lower stakes, and they've all been pretty satisfying. Exactly the type of thing you want this time of year. And of course, after the Super Bowl and after the Grammy Awards and after the Olympics, very importantly, the 2 weeks of the Olympics, starting in late February, there will be many new shows premiering as well. So quite a heavy slate of very high profile series coming throughout the entire year. So subscribe to our podcast so you know when all that stuff is coming out, get our reviews, our opinions, and watch along with you guys. Oh, and of course, reach out to us, needsomeIntroduction@gmail.com. Anything else out of this, really like over 100 shows, pretty high profile shows premiering in the next year or so that you'd like us to specifically look out for. Okay, so on to the Academy Award nominations. Not a ton of surprises in what was nominated this year, but a very strong slate of movies, as I mentioned in my previous best of episode earlier this month. And a lot of stuff that was in my top 20 is in the nomination list. So, leading the charge with 16 nominations, a record number of nominations, is the movie Sinners, currently available on HBO Max. I'm surprised this hasn't been reissued. It may be. Maybe this will get back out there again, although this is from Warner Brothers. Also, One Battle After Another is also from Warner Brothers, reissued this very week, probably around the world, but definitely here in the United States. Onto these large format IMAX theater screens, which, of course, Sinners also made a lot of money on those. Sinners, a true phenomenon here in the United States, a hit around the world, but a huge, massive box office phenomena here in the US. Much more so than One Battle After Another, which conversely was very popular overseas compared to its pretty modest take in the United States. And by the way, One Battle After Another, much more expensive than Sinners, despite the fact that Sinners has to recreate a different time period. I'm not going to talk about the budgetary spend on these films, but how Sinners, which is an incredible production with much special effects and, like I said, huge sets and costumes, although apparently a lot of these were recycled. Interesting production notes on this film, by the way. Still were able to make this movie for about $90 million. One Battle After Another cost about $170 million, even with the tax breaks that Warner Brothers got for shooting in California. It comes out to about 140, but the actual spend is about 170 million. Of course, they shot in California. That's very expensive, but still twice as expensive. I mean, as far as managing budgets, I think that Sinners did the better job. Is it the better movie? No, I do not think so. But very importantly, that Sinners at a $90 million budget point had incredible technical production values as well. And that's why we have this massive 16 nomination list. It includes music. It's practically a musical. So it has original music, has an original song, many award, I think almost every category of the major awards, and we'll get into them with a performance slotted in there. So it really covers the gamut. If you will go down further down the list, you have films that have a lot of nominations, mostly below the line in the craft services like the production design, the costumes, but not so heavy on the performances or in the major categories for screenplay and picture. And then, of course, you have films that are heavier on the performance side and the usual expected categories. Sinners really straddles both. It's like a blockbuster with opulent production values and special effects, and simultaneously a drama too with great performances. So it's able to get this huge 16 nominations, incredibly impressive. And that's the thing I'd say. I was not the biggest fan of this film. It originally wasn't in my top 20. I rewatched it. It did make my top 20, definitely not near the top of my list because I have significant issues with the final third of the film. That's really where my critique is. Everything else I really think is incredible. But regardless, even in my initial appreciation of the film, the performances and the production is absolutely top notch. And of course, all of that has been recognized here in these nominations. Plus, the Academy Award always wants to get at least one like really popular film in its nomination list to attract viewers for. And this is all those things. It is not only a prestigious production, it also has a huge box office take. And of course, also brings some representation to the nomination list. Okay, number 2, One Battle After Another, my favorite film of the year. And I think even though it has 13 nominations, still a huge number of nominations, but not 16. Also from Warner Brothers, by the way, also available on HBO Max, but also back in theaters in large format. And definitely worth watching. I saw this in IMAX, and it's absolutely thrilling to watch this in IMAX if you've only seen it at home. And it is still the front runner, despite the fact having fewer nominations. Okay, number 3, Frankenstein, available on Netflix, of course, not in theaters, although it did have a very short run in theaters. Has 9 nominations. Not so surprising to me. Even if it hadn't been nominated for Best Picture, I was assuming it would have many nominations because it does have truly spectacular production values. And as a matter of fact, I think if you've seen this film, or even if you have not, if you're just interested in the way that a film like this is made, just the craft of making a giant film at this scale, check out the making of documentary for Frankenstein on Netflix, which is a great piece of propaganda to get nominations. I actually, on my Letterboxd review, gave this a higher star rating than the film, which I did like, and mostly because the second half works very well, much better than the first half of the film, and mostly because of one key performance, which I'll wait because it will pop up again later in this recap. But I think this is an example of something being available on Netflix was actually a way to expose it to such a large audience, the voting block as well. And you do think with Netflix getting so many nominations this year and Warner Brothers, if that acquisition goes through, what an incredible slate this would have been for Netflix / Warner Brothers to have so many nominations in a single year. But going back to that documentary, do check it out. It's such an incredible, shows you how every little decision in the film is so complex and it requires the incredible skill of these team of craftsmen and women. But of course, Del Toro, the Academy loves Del Toro. They've already given him a win for Best Picture and for Best Directing for The Shape of Water, and he's been nominated for Nightmare Alley as well. So the Academy loves him. This is an impressive production, and I love to hear, I don't always love Del Toro's films. As a matter of fact, I always have issues with them almost across the board, except for Pan's Labyrinth, for example, which is a masterpiece, but most of the time, they don't always work for me, or big chunks of the movies do not work. And yet, I love to hear him talking about the craft of filmmaking and how thoughtful he is in every decision he makes. And I think that the Academy appreciates that as well, although didn't nominate him for Best Director this year. Still, with 9 nominations, very impressive. Also with 9 nominations, and from A24, Marty Supreme. Marty Supreme, by the way, if you want to watch it, only available in theaters, but coming to HBO Max probably within the next 2 months, probably around the time of the Academy Awards ceremony, you would expect to see this premiere. And it looks like Timothée Chalamet still seems to be the frontrunner for Best Actor. So probably a huge debut on HBO Max when that day comes. Also with 9 nominations and a huge showing for Neon this year. I think they have 4 of the 5 and almost got 5 of the 5 best foreign language films from Neon, who won Best Picture last year, by the way, with Anora, and Sentimental Value nominated for 9 Academy Awards as well. And we'll get into the nomination breakdown, but some of the performers are very highly ranked to actually win. Number 6 goes to Hamnet from Focus. And this should be premiering on Peacock probably in February, but just had a major theatrical expansion this week. Looks to become a blockbuster overseas, especially in England, where it's already a huge hit, and with 8 nominations. Okay, and then the bottom 4 nominees here all have 4 nominations. One is Begonia, which we had a whole conversation about here on the podcast. The Secret Agent from Neon, as like I mentioned, they have nearly swept the best foreign language category. This is a Brazilian film starring Wagner Moura. Train Dreams, which was in my top 10 for the year as well. Also on Netflix. I wish I'd seen this in a movie theater. Such beautiful cinematography of this film. Do check out my best of the year episode from a few weeks back, or check out the conversation Darren and I had about Train Dreams, a whole episode we dedicated to it here when it premiered back in November. And lastly, one of my top 5 movies of the year, F1, which a lot of people are laughing at. They put F1 in here. I mean, I think just to see that movie in the movie theater, absolutely thrilling. Available on Apple TV, by the way, now, if you have an Apple TV subscription. And still thrilling to watch. I watched it with my whole family, multiple generations of the family around the holidays. And we loved it. We loved watching it yet again. A real thrilling, incredibly well-made film. Not the strongest script in the world, but definitely a pleasure to watch. And there's something to be said about just being a thrilling film, just something to watch on the screen and having star power and incredible visuals and a thrilling sports film. Always a good recipe for me. So in case I didn't already say this, just to wrap things up, to close the circle on where these are available, Hamnet is available or will be available on Peacock in February, currently in theaters in wide release. Begonia currently available on Peacock and coming to Amazon Prime soon. F1, as I mentioned, on Apple TV. The Secret Agent only in theaters, but through the Neon deal should pop up on Hulu around the time of the Academy Awards. This should be very similar to Anora's rollout, where it premiered on Hulu and was a huge hit right as the Academy Award wins came in. I think within a week, it premiered on Hulu. Expect the same here. And Train Dreams, of course, available currently on Netflix. Okay, to go through them and just talk about like the odds of winning. Of course, One Battle After Another has won almost every major award up until now. So expect that it will continue. The expectation is that it will win here. If there's going to be a spoiler, it will probably be Sinners. But Hamnet has won some major awards as well. I didn't tell you my opinion of Hamnet. I think it's totally fine. I think the ending works really well. I'd have to get into spoilers to have explained my issues with the film, but I think that big parts of the film do not work. But the emotions are so pure. It's beautifully performed. The acting is really top notch, especially among the child actors. And yeah, and the emotional punch works. It looks fantastic. I'm a fan of Chloe Zhao. I think that Nomadland is actually really excellent, and also has an emotional wallop at the end of that film. But I just have some significant issues with the structure of the story, which probably comes from the novel, which I have not read. But it is, I think, a ding on the film. I liked it. It's not in my top 20, though. Marty Supreme, of course, turning into a giant hit. It's already A24's biggest film ever and continues to just roll out now overseas. And of course, if Chalamet wins Best Actor, which he is favorited to do, this film is going to make a lot more money. And really proves that he's one of the very few true stars we have, especially from his generation. Almost certainly not to win. Going down the list, Sentimental Value looks to be the strongest of the remainder of films. The director did get a nomination, but I think that's one of those things where just getting him nominated, very well respected, Joachim Trier, by the way, is sufficient for this film, I think. And of course, will probably win one of the main acting awards as well. And then Frankenstein with all the below the line nominations. People do love that Del Toro in general and the production of this film in general and performances are probably, there's one performance that's in the mix a little bit, but certainly not going to win Best Picture. Same goes for F1, for Train Dreams, which is incredible to this production, these writer-director combo who just had a nomination last year with Sing Sing and now another nomination this year. Great run for them. The Secret Agent, another Brazilian film 2 years in a row to have a Brazilian film nominated for Best Picture. There's a very strong Brazilian Academy contingency now that it's become more international. And I would expect to see, if you have these very popular Brazilian films, to see even more nominations in the future. And Begonia, Yorgos Lanthimos, has been nominated multiple times here, so the Academy definitely loves him, and he's a megastar back in Greece. And they love Emma Stone as well, of course. So put Emma Stone and Yorgos together, it'll probably be nominated for Best Picture. And we, of course, discussed this film in great detail here in the podcast as well in a spoiler episode. So if you have watched it and you want to hear my conversation with Darren about it, do check the back catalog just a couple of weeks ago for this episode. Okay, Best Director, like the odds for Best Film, Paul Thomas Anderson finally getting an Academy Award win for a very illustrious career. And he will almost certainly win Best Director this year. If anyone's going to spoil, of course, it will be Ryan Coogler. Chloe Zhao for Hamnet has already won, so unlikely to win again here, but she does have a contingency, of course, within the Academy. She's already been nominated previously. Josh Safdie for Marty Supreme, I believe has been nominated before. I could be wrong about this, actually, but I believe he's been nominated before for screenplay for Uncut Gems. And of course, Joachim Trier for Sentimental Value already has been nominated for Best Foreign Language Film for The Worst Person in the World. And this is a big thumbs up from the Academy here for he had a truly impressive. I would recommend basically all of his previous films, a true generational talent here, one of the best directors of his generation, although not as high on this film as I have been on some of his previous ones, which is not to say that it's bad. It was in my top 20. All right, on Best Actor, Timothée Chalamet looks like he's not only the youngest male performer to have this many nominations. I think he's only 30 now. This is already his third nomination. It's funny, I had not seen most of his iconic performances. I saw him in the Dune films, and I'd only seen him in a couple of things before. I had never even seen until this year, Call Me By Your Name, or last year, I should say. And then with the Dylan film coming out, I caught up on that film, and I was shocked at what an incredible performance he gives in Call Me By Your Name at such a young age. And I was just shocked at how good he was there, and basically immediately became a fan of his between Dune and seeing A Complete Unknown and then watching Call Me By Your Name, finally getting around to it. And here he is again, giving an incredible performance. These are such varied performances. And most importantly, he draws. This is what you want. And they're going to give him the mantle of the star of his generation with this award, which I think they will give to him, even though I think he'll be the youngest to win in this category. Because not only is he basically nominated for everything he puts out, he's very much intentionally curating his career, and he's really talented. And he brings people to the movie theater. If there's a spoiler here, it would be that Leonardo DiCaprio may win again for One Battle After Another. But I really think this is really the passing of the baton, by the way, from DiCaprio as the prestige actor of his generation to Chalamet, who is basically the Leonardo DiCaprio of 10 or 15 years ago, or maybe 20. So maybe the passing of the baton there. Wagner Moura, I'm not a huge fan, or maybe I just need to watch Secret Agent again to get my mind around it. A film that from moment to moment keeps changing genres. It's thrilling and fun to watch, but confusing as well. So I did very much like that film, but I was a little overwhelmed by it, to be honest. But Wagner Moura gives an incredible performance. Unlikely that he will win in this category, but great to see him be nominated. Michael B. Jordan, great to see him nominated here. I was so impressed, even though I, once again, revised my review of Sinners, was a little disappointed with the first time I watched it. I was so impressed by his dual performance in that film. Very happy to see that it wasn't forgotten here by the end of the year. And Ethan Hawke in Blue Moon. This is a really strong category. I think Ethan Hawke, by the way, has had a great year. Loved him in The Lowdown. Loved him in Blue Moon. Loved Blue Moon. It was in my top 15, I think, for the year. Richard Linklater's film that is not available to stream yet, I believe, but should be available very shortly. But love to see him get a nomination here. I'm a little upset that Joel Edgerton didn't get a nomination for Train Dreams, but I really like these 5 nominees, so I don't know if I could slot him in here. And if I had to pick between Ethan Hawke getting a nomination or Joel, I'm very encouraged that Edgerton, who hasn't been one of my favorite actors, is maybe becoming a more interesting actor as he ages, but I would not remove Ethan Hawke from this nomination list to put him in there. Okay, Best Actress looks to be almost a lock for Jessie Buckley in Hamnet. If there's going to be an upset, my favorite performance by a female this year, Rose Byrne, in If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, which is coming to HBO Max next week. Do check it out. One of my favorite films of the year, in my top 20. And primarily, I mean, very well made, period. But what an incredible performance from Rose Byrne. And I would give her the award. So I do hope this is the beginning of a different type of career for her. Although I love her in her comedy performances as well. But I hope this changes, or should say, gives her more opportunities in the future. It's an incredible performance. I actually absolutely loved Renata Rensvi in The Worst Person in the World. I like her very much in Sentimental Value, but it's almost a little strange to give her Best Actress. She's obviously the focus of the story early on, but then disappears from the movie for a big chunk of it. A little strange that they gave her the Best Actress nomination. But then again, since they have Best Supporting Actress locked up in another candidate there, maybe that's just the way the pieces fell together. I liked her performance here. Not my favorite performance of hers, but she has some real standout scenes. Emma Stone in Begonia, another great performance by her. I don't know if I would have given her a nomination here. She has so many nominations. She's always excellent. And as I mentioned in our recap here of Begonia a few episodes back, I appreciated her performance even more the second time I watched the film. So you know what? Now that I say that, maybe she does deserve to be up here, especially considering the competition. And last slot is Kate Hudson for Song Sun Blue. I'm actually in the process of watching this film. I have not finished it. I'm about a third of the way through it. So I'll have a more full opinion. I like Kate Hudson. She's absolutely sweet and charming in this. She does her own singing, all great. But this really feels like the old school Academy Award nominations for like, hey, welcome back. And she's been nominated before very early in her career. And here's a chance to revitalize her career. And I always enjoy seeing her on screen. But I don't know if maybe things will change once I finish watching the film. I'm not sure if I would have put her here, especially when there are people who are excluded here. Primarily, I think one of the snubs was Chase Infinity from One Battle After Another, which I think people didn't see her in the Best Actress category, but I absolutely did, because I thought that basically 2/3 of the film, she is the star, and this young actress going literally nose to nose with some of these really intimidating, great actors, the greatest actors of their generation in some cases, and really holding her own. She was magnetic, utterly magnetic, and I think she should have had the nomination over some of these other candidates here. Although this is a strong slate, like I said, with a caveat that I have not finished watching Song Sung Blue yet. Oh, and of course, I'm watching that a third of the way through because it just became available to rent just this very week. So I've just started watching it. Not streaming yet. Okay, Best Supporting Actor almost certainly goes to Stellan Skarsgård. I think not only because he gives an absolutely fantastic, in my opinion, Best Actor category, not Best Supporting Actor, in Sentimental Value. It really seems like he probably has this, although there's some tough competition. This category is very strong. But I have to assume this is, he's had a hugely successful American career. His sons are very famous just seeing them on the awards campaign together recently has been so much fun to see them together. This really seems almost autobiographical when you see the relationship he's had with Alexander, for example, where he was traveling for work all the time. And he really brings that autobiographical aspect to his performance in the film. So for that reason, it's very strong. He's obviously very recognizable. He's older. He had a stroke a couple of years ago. So this really could be a moment to give him this huge accolade, like a capper on his career. And for all those reasons, I think he probably is most likely to win. But it's hard for me to say I definitely would give him the award. Like for me, my personal award, he's in the running, but practically in a three-way tie for this win is also Benicio del Toro in One Battle After Another and Sean Penn in One Battle After Another. I'd say that the first time I saw One Battle After Another, I would say Sean Penn because it's such a strong and obvious and over the top, but still humanizing performance of this monster that he plays. I would have given it to him, but I got to tell you, the second time around, Benicio del Toro, much more subtle in what he's doing. I think I had to go the other way. And I think maybe other people in the voting block will be confused as to which of these two to give the award to. And that may put Skarsgård over the top, especially with the also sentimental value, no pun intended, of that particular award. Also, one of my favorites of the year, Jacob Elordi. Very happy to see him nominated for Frankenstein, as we have an episode in the backlog where we discuss that film as well. And as I shouted out in that episode, I thought that the film worked for me. In the end, I was won over by the film because of the second half really being dedicated to the monster, to Elordi's performance. And lastly, Delroy Lindo, which is a little bit of a surprise here for a supporting actor. I think, just given the part is pretty small in Sinners, I would have given this slot to Jesse Plemons, who I think is one of my favorite actors, and absolutely fantastic in Begonia. But I'm not going to complain that Delroy Lindo, who I think is a truly great actor who's now in his 70s, and I think this is his first nomination. What an incredible career he's had in many Spike Lee movies, primarily some of his greatest performances. Also as a TV actor in The Good Fight, very good on that. I think 1 season or 2 seasons of that show, which I actually watched. And he may have gotten an Emmy nominations for that. I don't know all of this, but all this to say that what a great career. So if getting a nomination here, which I think is only a nomination, no chance of winning here, but I think that it is still a nice capper to his career. But for me, my preference, Plemons is so powerful in Begonia, and you really need, with Stone's performance, you need a really strong two-hander there. But I'm not going to be mad. But I do want to make sure Plemons should continue to evolve his career. Such a great set of performances he's already given, and hope there's more for him in the future. Almost certainly will be. I'm sure he has a bunch of movies coming out just this year that could get him yet another nomination. Okay, Best Supporting Actress, favorite, and I completely agree with this, by the way. And this, again, is an incredibly strong slate of actresses. I do agree, Teyana Taylor, who has become the front runner. Early on, it looked like she wouldn't even get a nomination, but it looks like she's been just building and building support for her nomination here. And as I mentioned in a conversation with my wife previously, after we rewatched the film, that in a way she haunts the rest of the film, even though I remember watching it, and when I was first discussing it, I said that she's in the first 40 or 45 minutes of the film, only to rewatch it and realize it's only like 20 something minutes. But still, it's such a magnetic performance. It haunts the rest of the film. So well deserved if she happens to win this. But a really strong block of nominees here as well. Inga Ibsdottir Lilius from Sentimental Value. When I watched that film, I had a lot of issues with that film, mostly with the pacing of it, but I loved her performance. And I remember my wife and I saw that at a film festival here near our house. This is months ago, but I remember saying she's never going to get nominated because her performance is so just lived in and modest and subtle, but so powerful. And I'm like, they will never nominate her for this. So happy to see her nominated. And at the time when I saw the film, which was before I saw No Battle After Another, I was like, she's the nominee. For me, she's the winner, hands down. That's been a little bit usurped because of Teyana Taylor. But like I said, an incredibly strong category here. At different times of the year, each one of these people was my nominee for Best Supporting Actress. Not so much for probably the third favorite, Elle Fanning, also in Sentimental Value. I think she's excellent in Sentimental Value. But given the fact her role is pretty small, It's very important, though, by the way, the relationship she has with Skarsgård in their scenes together. Very important, where he's looking for a surrogate daughter and neglecting his actual daughters, really speaks so much to his character. So really thematically important to the film. And she slots in perfectly, playing this role of the slightly ditzy, but aspiring and not an idiot at all, not a caricature of this American actress, a little bit out of her depth. And it could very easily have been a cartoonish performance. She's really excellent in it, and probably would be on my short list of best supporting actresses, but not in, I never had her at the top of the list. But someone who was at the top of my list was Amy Madigan when I saw Weapons. What an incredible performance. Her role itself is a spoiler for that film, but I guess everybody knows about it now. But what an amazing performance. And definitely when I saw Weapons, I'm like, well, she just won Best Supporting Actress. Maybe not the case, but at one point, it really seemed like she was going to run away with this. And for me, I guess this was always the case. But when I saw Sinners, again, had some issues with the film the first time I saw it, but loved Wunmi Musaka, who's just such a great actress, just really brings this emotional weight to all her performances. And I thought she was like the heart of Sinners, and so powerful, some of the scenes she has later in the film. And really, and again, I like, well, they're not going to remember her by the time the awards come around, but indeed they did. And I'm very happy to see her nominated. Okay, some surprises, the storylines here. Of course, Sinners with all those nominations, really impressive, and an incredible career that Ryan Coogler's been putting together for himself so far. Very impressive to see foreign language films becoming such a part of the main categories. Sentimental Value, most prominent here, but also The Secret Agent, some really surprising results. Another surprise, as I mentioned, Delroy Lindo slotting into Best Supporting Actor. And on the opposite side of that Plemons was not nominated. F1 getting a nomination for Best Picture. By the way, if you do bet on these things, if you had bet that F1 would be nominated, you would have gotten $400 for every $100 you bet on that, made on that bet. So a good bet to have made if you did. Jacob Elordi, of course, being nominated. Very impressive for this young actor. Kate Hudson slotting in, and Chase Infinity not being nominated. That's another one of these surprise nominations. Oh, and by the way, the new category this year for Best Casting, I could not agree more. Of all the categories I can complain about, what a great set of nominees. Hamnet, as I mentioned, not only the main roles, but even the children. Great casting for the film Hamnet. Would not work without those young performers. Marty Supreme, a giant, sprawling, sometimes just cameos from famous folks in just characters that have one scene, but across the board, great performances for everybody in Marty Supreme, and creating this real world that people live in, these odd characters at every turn. One battle after another. Again, just think about all those acting nominations. But again, even the deeper, even like all these people, these illegal immigrants that Benicio del Toro has this underground railroad for, all of those performers just in one scene, just faces we see for moments, just the kids who are skateboarding on rooftops, for example, and so memorable. So incredible casting for that film for sure. Sinners, of course, incredible, giant world, giant characters, and even these very small roles. Some of these people are already starting to become stars, even having just a handful of scenes in that movie. And lastly, The Secret Agent, which like I said, I have mixed feelings about that film, or just maybe kind of confused about it, but at its strongest, remarkable moments. But I cannot speak enough about this incredible cast. So many people who, many of them non-professional actors, giving really, truly great performances and just great faces. Sometimes just these people with these really unique and interesting and just feel like real people, and incredible. And I love this category. This might be my best new category. You can almost, if you love performances, you can just look at those 5 films, and those are maybe the best cast of any films you'll see this year. Okay, the major snubs we'll talk about. Wicked, nothing. No nominations for, not only for Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, who were nominated last year. I have not seen this film, so I can't speak to any of this, by the way. But I did like those performances very much last year. And I liked this film. I was surprised, actually, that I didn't dislike it. The first one, I should say. I have not seen the second. But none of the other, last year was nominated for, not only for songs, and for the performances, and for Best Picture, but also for costume design and set design and special effects. Think about all the below the line technical aspects, and nothing was nominated this year, which is truly shocking. All right, Paul Mescal in Best Actor. Almost certainly everybody assumed he would get a nomination, especially with Jessie Buckley drawing so much attention to her performance. But nope, he didn't make the cut. And I have to tell you, I would not, I mean, he's not terrible. I like him in general as an actor, but he was not the standout performance in this film for sure. I would not have given him a nomination given how strong that category is. Is he in my top 10? Maybe, but he's not in my top 5. Adam Sandler, again, such a strong category for Best Supporting Actor. I again had a feeling that Jay Kelly might get him a nomination, but in the end, no. And I honestly can't complain about this when even Jesse Plemons is not getting a nomination. Clooney for Jay Kelly, not really surprised by that one, to be honest. Avatar getting almost no nominations. The first film, of course, got one of the record number of nominations ever. The second one got 4 nominations, including Best Picture and I think Best Director. And this year, only 2 nominations, all special effects and I think sound design. Oh, and the greatest snub of all is that No Other Choice from Park Chan-wook had no Academy Award nominations at all. When you think about this Korean new wave of films, and you think about this incredible career he's had with 8 films, most notably Old Boy, Decision to Leave, The Handmaiden, and now No Other Choice, which collectively have had, along with some other films of his career actually, have collectively had hundreds, well over 300 award nominations internationally. He's won more than half of those awards. He's been nominated for the Palme d'Or at Cannes multiple times, has won Best Director at least twice, perhaps 3 times now, and never even gotten an Academy Award nomination. It seems personal. I'm not sure what the Academy has against Park Chan-wook, and especially this film, where it has turned, this is the second most financially successful South Korean film in history, and everywhere it's played, even as it's opening in Europe now, is a blockbuster in multiple countries, with most of the largest territories just to come, and a big hit in the US just going into wide release this very week. And it could make close to $20 million in the US, a huge word of mouth hit, could make potentially get to as high as $100 million internationally, incredibly rare for a South Korean film to make that kind of money. And yet not even nominated, not for Best Foreign Language Film, not for Best Screenplay Adaptation, no nominations. So yeah, a shocking snub yet again. But Darren saw it last week and had a rave for it. It was my number 2 movie of the year, and we will be discussing it in next week's episode. So that's it. That's a rundown. And now I'll get into that conversation with my wife discussing these 2 series. Thanks for your patience if you've been listening to all this, but I hope it gave you some insight into those awards and some viewing recommendations if you haven't caught up on all these. The Academy Awards will be held on March 15th and hosted by Conan O'Brien. Just a real quick side note, one last comment I have to make. Given the fact that all these films come out on streaming now, they're like out of theaters in 5 weeks, 6 weeks, even One Battle After Another, now just getting a re-release, and Hamnet just finally getting. In the olden days, these films would have this very strong box office run leading up to the awards night. I don't know, because they don't release these numbers, if a similar thing is happening on digital streaming all the way up to Oscar night. So maybe this makes sense, but I think they need to make this nomination to awards night window much shorter, because you can imagine if it was like a month out, all the films would get re-released in theaters for like a month. Everybody who wants to see them would quickly watch them, and then awards night would come. But now with these films already available on digital, with the top 10, it's like this seems so antiquated, where everybody's top 10s have already come out by the end of the year or shortly thereafter. Everybody starts tracking down these films. They all become available for streaming pretty much like within a week or 2 of the nominations being announced. And you think about like just this slate of films, almost everything will be available to stream on some platform by early February, probably. And then we're going to sit around and wait another whole month and a half. None of this makes any sense. They need to fix that. Fix that, everybody. Fix it. All right. Let me get into that conversation with Kim about Drops of God and, primarily, The Pitt, Episode 3. Okay, Kim, so we recorded this conversation last night, but I had some technical issues today, as did you. So
Yes, I did.
At work, though, this is my other kind of work, my hobby. And stupidly, while I was recording the preamble to this conversation, I deleted our entire recording. So you're going to have to indulge me and have the same conversation yet again.
I can't wait. Hopefully, this doesn't have any technical complications because my day was filled with computer issues and various things that are all part of the medical field.
Apropos of this conversation today about the Pitt and Drops of God, let's spend a few minutes before we get into the Pitt episode 3. We'll discuss Drops of God briefly. I think we both loved the first season of the show. It's not like some great, deep rumination on creativity, but it does want to, I think that's part of the reason I like it so much. It really is about aspiring to something creative, something more in your life. And I thought season 1 could have been like a one and done just because it wraps up very satisfyingly. But I really did like to have a show that is not only beautiful to look at, but deals with, wanting to be a critic, like what I do, like watch something and then watch it critically and have an opinion and the value of that. But then also deals with like the double-edged sword of that, how her father, Camille's father, this jerk wine collector who had became incredibly famous, having this wine guide, could destroy people's reputations because of his really obtuse opinion of exactly what wine should be. So I really thought it was interesting about, the creative process, the value of being a critic, but also seeing someone who wants to be so true to themselves being like downright abusive to the people he should care about the most.
And what I also liked about Drops of God is all of the family issues that they discuss. And throughout the show, they become closer to each other, the main characters. We learn a lot about where they came from and how they got to be where they are and the relationships they have with their families. So they did a good job of progressing that family-oriented storyline.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually another really strong thing. Of course, the big theme, and we're just going to spoil season 1, so make sure, check the show notes, by the way, if you want to jump to the Pitt conversation. You don't want to have season 1 spoiled for you, if by chance you want to watch it. And of course, we're also going to spoil the first episode of season 2. But, of course, we discover over the course of the season, that Camille and Issei are actually brother and sister. And like you mentioned, I like all the complexity, the family dynamics that at first you see the mom, her mom, Camille's mom, as being like a real, witch, basically, like being terrible at like not letting this girl have a relationship with her dad when they seem to have this very close relationship when they were younger. But at the same time, you start to realize, well, there's a lot of complexity there. He was living in Japan. And of course, in her mind, he has chosen one child over the other. And probably the realization at some point that the mom had that if she knew this, that it would be very painful for her.
Do you think that Camille's mom knew about his other child?
I have to assume that she knew about it for the fact that we presume here, this is presumption, but based on the way she reacts to this, it seems to be that she knew that there had been an affair and that theoretically at the same time when they probably were having problems in their marriage, this other child was born. So that's how I'm reading it. And maybe you make a good point. It's at no point does she explicitly say this, but I always read it as the mom sees him choosing one family over the other, which of course is very painful to her, but painful, she's trying to protect her daughter to some extent.
The way I saw it was he was a manipulative person and she wanted to keep Camille away from him for those reasons because, he, when she was younger, was actually teaching her how to taste different foods and then taste wine as a child. And she had these very drastic side effects when she tasted wine, even as an adult, which in the beginning of the show, obviously she gets alcohol like in her mouth at a bar when some random guy like kisses her with like a shot in his mouth. And she immediately falls over, passes out and has a nosebleed, which was her reaction when she was a child, when her dad was trying to teach her how to taste wine. She passed out and had a nosebleed. So I think maybe she, Camille's mom, views him as like a dangerous person because he subjected her to those side effects when she was little. So I'm not completely convinced that it was because he knows there was a child out of wedlock that was there.
I mean, but at this point, when I have to assume that the mom knew this, because in season 2, when they're all sitting around together, they of course are openly saying like brother and sister, and she's sitting there and she doesn't seem uncomfortable with it. The mother, this is, does not seem uncomfortable with this fact. So it doesn't seem like this is new information for her. She's actually very excited to see Issei at the beginning of this second season. So all that is to say, I feel like she already knew this. It's not like, think about her just finding out this horrible relationship with her husband and then finding out, wait a second, she finds out now that there was a child out of wedlock on top of everything else.
You also don't see her for most of the first season.
Yes.
After Camille leaves to go do her wine challenge situation. So she could be already processing this new information off camera.
Yes. I mean, this is interesting because my read of it was very different than yours. But it's interesting that now that we're having this conversation, it's not actually explicitly said. But regardless, he is a jerk, whether she knew the full scope of it, 20 years ago or just 1 year ago. It's, obviously he was manipulative and self-involved, obviously, definitely. And also is pretty toxic when you think about how he did not want to split this up between the siblings and knew that these siblings would, at this point, when you're thinking about that, how we kick off season 2, that there's yet another challenge he has to identify this wine, that he was never able to do it, and saying, like, if you want to stake your own claim, and it turns out over the course of this episode, they're both vested in trying to prove themselves, that this is something where you can like usurp me if you want to. And of course, they're both suddenly really driven to do exactly that. But given all that he is still addressing like the winner of the contest. Like, so even as he's, first of all, Machiavellian contrivances from the grave. It's like one of the Saw movies, if you guys know the Saw movies, that like the killer from Saw like dies in the first movie and he's still manipulating everybody over the course of those 10 movies. But, so in a way, it's like he's still manipulating everybody from the grave. But on top of that, it's the fact that he's still addressing them like, think about these siblings just finding out about each other, and now he has them compete against each other, and then he tells them that they cannot share this with each other. Like, it's really horrible.
But as we know from the final episode in season 1, they do share it. So I was hoping that would be the case all along. So despite his manipulation of them, he's actually changed both their lives in a very dramatic way. Potentially for the better, although into season 2, you wonder if Issei is now like, what do I do with myself? I didn't win the competition. I don't know who I am. I need to go find a vision, which they touch on what he's trying to do in the second season. But I think overall, they have a relationship with each other. Camille had no idea what she was doing with her life, and now she has a partner. She's living in France. She has a vineyard that they're renovating, and her life is completely different. So that is thanks to her dad, despite these evil manipulations that led them to this end.
Yeah, I don't even know if the show, to its credit, first of all, just to circle back on something you mentioned from season 1, I think that the bloody nose thing is a leftover from the manga, which is much more lighthearted than this show actually is. And I've also heard there is a second section of the manga, second release that came out like a decade later because the first one was so popular. And what I've heard, I have not read any of these, by the way, these comics, but what I heard is that this second season is very different than what they did with the original manga. So it's just kind of on its own now. But I do think that the bloody nose thing was left over from the manga. So I'm glad that they got rid of that very early on, because I'm like, I can't imagine that would have been, maybe it's a funny sight gag in the comic, but I'm like, I don't want to see her getting a bloody nose every single time she's trying to drink wine.
Yeah, that is pretty ridiculous. But when you said it was based on this Japanese comic, I totally forgave it because I immediately imagined a comic book scenario where she gets a bloody nose. I'm like, that's fine. That makes perfect sense in the setting of a comic, not in the setting of someone with a real medical problem. See, that's my problem. I focus on the medical reality of everything.
But going back to what you said about the family dynamics in the show, another thing I really do like, beyond just the beautiful design and the love of wine and the love of anything, by the way, it's like the same reason I think Ratatouille is such a great film, just to call that out, because I love that film, because again, it's about being a critic and the value of being a critic, even if you can be toxic, like the critic in that movie, the cartoon, the Ratatouille film. It really is a toxic figure, but still has some inherent value in being critical. But most importantly, going back to what you said about family, I really like that the characters in this show are complex figures, right? Like theoretically, you can say, why can't they just be happy? But just like their dad, who was a complex figure, who gave his daughter structure and love and these memories, we see her memories, these strong memories of this bond she had with her dad when they had a good relationship when she was younger, even though he was very, specific in his way of thinking. But I do think that's interesting when you look at all the interpersonal relationships, that all these people can be terrible at times, but they can also be great at times and aspiring to something. And it's complicated because people are complicated. And I like that the characters are allowed to be complicated and unlikable, sometimes straight up unlikable. Like Camille in this episode is kind of unlikable, and but understandably so, given her relationship with her dad. When she's dumping the one of a kind wine down the sink, you're like, oh my God, what are you doing? But at the same time, I empathize, right? We don't want to keep.
Despite her father, because
Right.
he's now created another challenge for them after they've recovered from the trauma of going through the first challenge. So it's an FU to her dad. I don't blame her for that.
For sure. But this season seems to be early on here much more focused on Issei, at least. And I did think he was kind of a bystander to a large extent in the first season, in so many ways, a bystander to his own life, a bystander to Camille's story. It seemed like obviously Issei was very important to the first season. And you said this already last night in our previous recording that no one will ever hear. We're not allowing it to be released. Actually, my computer's not allowing it to be released. But that it's a fact that he really was having things happen to him, even though he had this exceptional skill. And in this second season, he's trying to define himself. And so I think it's an interesting start, and probably smart to make him a bigger part of the story here for the second season.
Yeah, I agree. He was such a serious conservative character. He barely spoke in the first season. Even when he was in the same space as Camille, they didn't have a conversation for many episodes. And now they start off the second season with him trying to find himself. And he has more lines of dialogue in the first episode than he had in the entire last season.
Perhaps. Some unresolved things, by the way, is like, and it's only been a year or less than a year since the previous season in the timeline of the show. And he apparently busted up, but maybe not. Maybe this journalist girlfriend is still back in Japan and just has work to do. So he's only been away for a few weeks.
We don't know.
We
haven't, she hasn't been mentioned yet.
Exactly. And it may be the case that she does pop up at some point in the future. He's maybe just said, I'm going to go to my sister's birthday party in France. I'll see you in a few weeks. So that could be something basic like that. Quick question I have for you. Oh, first of all, let's wrap up on Issei, that he asked Camille about the skill she has, this innate ability, the synesthesia she has, where she actually has a visualization when she tastes something. It's like Pharrell. I don't know if you know about Pharrell, but Pharrell says when he plays music, he sees it visually. So that's how he writes, like the songs in his head are colors. And then he tries to write the songs to match the colors. So some people have this synesthesia. She apparently has it for taste. That's what my assumption is here. And there was a hint in the very end of last season, after she explained this to him, that he tries to really focus on the flavors, and he gets up and goes to bed. And behind him, right, like as he moves his body just for a split second, we see like an apple or something floating over the table. And he turns around real quick to look at the table, and it's gone. So, but then he's on a literal vision quest in this particular episode of the show.
Yeah, he's very impressed with her ability to visualize these scents and flavors, and he is desperate to do the same. So you do get a hint of it, like you mentioned. And then in the first episode of this season, he decides to go on deep dives where you plunge without a tank deep into the ocean, and you have to hold your breath for many minutes at a time. And he's hoping that once he gets hypoxic enough, he's going to have a vision. And the woman in Spain who takes him on one of the dives mentions that this is really not the goal here. We don't want you to have visions because that means you're not getting enough oxygen. But he does have a vision of the moon when he goes down on that dive in Spain and nearly dies. So good job, Issei.
Yeah, and this finally snaps Camille out of this, this antagonistic position she's in, where she doesn't want to do what her dad wants her to do. But of course, she's trying to save her brother's life here. And also, of course, they've seeded it already based on that conversation she has with that journalist who's there, that she what, last season that wrapped up, we were talking about like, what are the stakes for next season? She has everything she could possibly want. But then, of course, when you have huge success, and if the impression is that somebody else has done this for you, and of course she feels like, well, I had this lost childhood and this bad relationship with my dad, and this is dragged on for decades, and she's been, traumatized by this her whole entire life. So she feels like I earned this given all the travail she's been through. But the outsiders just be like, oh, that's so nice. You won that contest and your dad gave you all that stuff. He was just like you. He was hard-headed just like you. And she really desperately wants to define herself. So, of course, we're seeing that both of them have their own motivations to want to complete this mission.
And she, unfortunately, as you mentioned, dumps the wine down the sink and then agrees to go on this quest with Issei after he nearly kills himself accidentally. And now they have no more wine to taste. So they only have that one sip of wine from the first episode to go on their next journey. So I'm not sure it was a great idea.
Good job, Camille. Yeah, so the question I kept sidelining because you kept bringing up other things I wanted to talk about. But the last thing before we cut over to the pit, we also know, kind of dropped, in the very first episode, she gets picked up at this bar by this younger guy who's like, oh my God, I saw you. I was a little kid. Just to let her feel like how she was like this prodigy that missed the boat. And he's like, oh, I started a business. I was so inspired by what you did at an early age. So now he's like in his early 20s. And he's like, I run this $1 million company. What have you done since you wrote that book as a teenager? And she's just like, nothing. She's just like kind of in suspended animation, which again is kind of her motivation to drive her through season 1. But what was that book she wrote? Did she write about the abusive relationship with her dad? Do you know of any additional context about this book she wrote? Was it fiction? Was it nonfiction? Like, what was it?
No, there's absolutely no reference made to that book. So we don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I thought that was going to pay off in some way, that, like she wrote this book and like, like I, in my mind, was like, oh, is she like a celebrity in France? She wrote this book about this bad relationship with her dad.
Many people know her.
Right.
But God knows what the book was about.
Yeah. Hopefully they give us some detail on that book. It's just like she was a famous writer when she was a kid. Oh my God, what book would a kid write that would be a bestseller? No details.
I'll forgive them for that because the show is so good.
Right. But I would like to know. I think that's interesting. That's another interesting. Imagine it's about a girl who has this really bad relationship with her dad. And then people are like, oh my God, that's the daughter of this other famous guy. Like that's even makes her famous. She's already a celebrity in some ways, right? Yeah. Anyway, on to the pit. Episode 3, hour 3. So to a large extent with this episode, we're kind of like cleaning the slate. A lot of the cases we've been following up until now get to resolve, but not all of them. As usual with this show, they're like, and not only with this show, but with this type of show, you have some cases that roll over and some cases that get tied up. The first thing I want to mention, Kim, you were right. Our abused daughter who is bleeding.
She's not our daughter.
The character, not our daughter. Yes. Our daughter's not abused. No matter what anyone says. But the daughter here on the show who everybody suspected, or Santos specifically suspected, that she'd been abused for so many reasons. Turns out it's a bleeding disorder. ITP, is it?
Yes, ITP. Idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, now known as, I forgot it, the new name for it. I still call it ITP. Autoimmune thrombocytopenia. Sorry, I've been working all day and my brain just exited.
It's quite all right. I don't think anyone would know the difference whether you remember that or not. What does Santos say? It means that
her immune system is attacking her platelets, so her platelets aren't functioning. So she's getting bruised very easily. And they can easily treat this with steroids.
Oh, but she says that it means that the patient is pathetic and the doctor is an idiot.
Yes. Yes, that's what I meant to say when I lost my words.
So you were correct on that one. Oh, and our person with the phantom pains who went for the CT scan did indeed have a brain tumor. You spotted that in the first episode.
Yes, I did. And I told you multiple times, this man has a brain tumor. So I'm sadly right. I don't want him to have a brain tumor. I don't want anyone to have a brain tumor. But they did develop that storyline a bit when his ex-wife was called in as his emergency contact and hasn't seen him for years and learns of the diagnosis and then starts to think about his personality changes when they were still married. And she asks Dr. Santos, is this related to the brain tumor, do you think? Do you think, oh, McKay, do you think his behavior could be attributed to this even years ago? And she said, it's possible. And she now is like reassessing her marriage in her mind and asks to still be the emergency contact. So that was a nice moment.
Yeah, this particular episode has some pretty like ham-fisted emotional moments, as this show in general is, but also has some kind of subtler moments. And the subtler stuff always works for me more than the ham-fisted one. And I think specifically this, and the performers get a lot of credit for this as well, just this ex-wife and ex-husband being in the room together, and the weight of that, not only like her still being on his contact list, which always ends up happening. Like, we know, like, just in my past, like, people where just relationships break up, and then eventually they're like, oh, I'm still your contact. It's like, well, yeah, because you didn't change your forms on your work forms or on your hospital or your health forms. And now she gets dragged into this. And then, of course, having to now have this empathy for him and seeing him. And apparently that they broke up where, she probably didn't want the relationship to end, but that now she's wondering, he suddenly became abusive and now she's moved on with her life. And yeah, there's a real sense of tragedy to the fact that there was like this missed opportunity. And she probably doesn't want things to go back. She doesn't want to like leave her husband for her ex again, but just thinking about like, wow, like all this was beyond our control. And it's like really sad when you think about it.
Agreed.
And by the way, maybe it's not a brain tumor. There's some growth. Maybe you can shed some light on this, but there are, I guess you can have just kind of these type of behavioral changes and have this, because you can just have like a benign growth in your brain that is causing some issues in a particular part. But some people get biopsies and it turns out that it's not a malignant growth, but it could still have really negative consequences, right? So there's still a chance, right?
Potentially. And they were together like 4 years prior. So this is a very slow growing mass if that's the case. So that's a good sign, I think. I'm not a neurosurgeon, however.
But if it was like an aggressive cancer, it obviously would have grown significantly at this point. One more carried over story is this racing family, apparently famous out in Pittsburgh, which I don't know if they're supposed to correlate to an actual racing family because like everybody in the place knows who these people are. So maybe there's a real world analog that we're supposed to be thinking of. I don't know enough about it to know one way or the other. And this one family member came in with like a burn last week from, they were frying something up and the cousins are visiting for the 4th of July. I guess they have some big event and one person got burned. And meanwhile, the uncles are visiting, I don't know, and one of them has very low blood pressure. And it turns out that they've all been sharing that this is what we do. It's the family tradition. We just put all our pills on the table and everybody just pops pills. And I already asked you about this, but I'm like, have you ever seen this? Is this actually, and once again, reach out to the audience here. If you know of this actually being a family tradition, because Sona and I watched that show, The Perfect Marriage. You watched this too, but we discussed it here in a podcast. And one of the major plot points in that show is that someone gets killed accidentally because they were just popping each other's pills. They just like, that's what we do. That's what the family does. I'm like, people really do this? I don't believe this for a second.
And when you say popping each other's pills, these people are taking cholesterol medication, blood pressure pills, not recreational prescriptions like Xanax or Percocet. This man takes 5 pills of a beta blocker and comes in with low blood pressure. So that is crazy. Makes no sense.
But maybe people do this. I don't know why this would be a plot point on the show if there wasn't some, they're trying to reference something, because it just seems like a most ridiculous thing to just be like, one pill, another pill, 4 of them. What's the difference?
Yeah, it's not like these pills have like great side effects.
So they got to the bottom of that one pretty quickly. One more dangling plot thread, still dangling beyond, is the baby Jane Doe, who we just get she's doing, what does she say?
Dana.
What does Dana say?
She's doing all right.
Or like something else. Like yeah. She's like, gangbusters.
My mother was on the phone with me last night and she was talking about this episode of The Pitt, and I hadn't seen it when she was, actually not last night, a couple nights ago. I hadn't seen the episode yet. And she's like, and the baby. I was like, Mom, no, don't tell me about the baby. She's like, don't worry. We don't find anything out about the baby, which is true. We don't see the baby at all. We do see the deaf woman in the waiting room, which you brought up last season, might have a connection to the baby. We're still not sure, but they have realized this woman is deaf. So they previously called her name. She didn't respond because she couldn't hear them. So now they're in the loop. So maybe this woman will re-enter the scene next episode.
I still think she's connected to the baby somehow, even if it's not her baby. Maybe she knows the person whose baby it is or something. And then because, like I mentioned in the previous conversation, first, when they find the baby, we see the whole discovery of the baby in silence because we're in her POV. And the next time we see her out there, they're announcing on the loudspeaker, did someone lose a baby? Did someone lose a baby? And we just see her looking straight ahead, which of course, not hearing the announcement. So maybe she knows whose baby this is. I am now pretty certain that it's not her who left the baby in the, it's like, oh, wait a second, I had a baby before. I should have told somebody.
I feel like you are obsessed with this baby.
It's an adorable baby.
Agreed. But the baby's okay. Last we checked.
Gangbusters.
I trust Dana. She's the charge nurse. She knows everything.
The cliffhanger, like all these cliffhangers, by the way, have so far, maybe this is like a way to fake us out, that each time it's like, oh, okay, it's just another, oh yeah, that's not a really big deal. And then we'll get a real zinger in one of these upcoming episodes. But the cliffhanger from last week was this kid showing up from a university library, having a complete panic attack, yelling out numbers and something, like maybe he's miswired his brain with all the studying he was doing at the library. But he comes in there. And also the security guard comes in who thinks he's like some kind of hero. And you know right away that he's going to get knocked down when he walks in there being like, these kids today, these drug addicts.
Yeah, and it turns out this kid has no drugs in his system. His Utox is negative, so they don't quite know why his behavior is so erratic. So I'm assuming he's psychotic, but it's just odd that he's just screaming random numbers. But I feel like that storyline might not go anywhere. He might just go to the psych floor and that's the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to assume that it's going to be some more payoff than this. Seems like a pretty...
Yeah, you're probably right. He probably took some medication or did something that had some side effect, and now he's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, he just had a psychotic break in college, which does happen sometimes. I mean, that's the age when people oftentimes start showing psychotic behavior.
Yes, schizophrenia is diagnosed in the early 20s. So he could be schizophrenic. He's just not acting like a typical schizophrenic. By the way, one of the patients I saw today at one of the hospitals I rounded on was schizophrenic, and she was picked up at the Newark airport for acting crazy. And they brought her into the hospital, and I saw her for a completely different reason. And by the time I saw her, she was completely calm. They must have given her some drugs.
Medication. Okay, the other, maybe the biggest case for this week, and it has kind of a multiple payoffs, not only in having a kind of a crazy case and having one of these like surprise twists in it with the way the case resolves, but also an emotional payoff, is this Asian couple that comes in. They have struck a motorcyclist head on. You've seen some motorcycle accidents in your history, so everybody please do wear a helmet if you're riding a motorcycle, because it's you've seen many dead people. My wife, that is, has seen many. I'm sure you could speak to this.
Luckily, not too many dead people, but a number of paralyzed people.
You have someone who, like, what do they call it? Like deglove their entire leg, right?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. There's just so many traumatic memories. I can't keep them all in my brain, but we did have, when I did trauma, we had a 19-year-old motorcycle accident and he was paralyzed from the neck down. It was horrendous. And a couple other terrible motor vehicle accidents involving teenagers, which we don't need to discuss.
We won't go into all that, but definitely wear your helmet, everybody, when you're driving or riding a motorcycle, or riding, or how do you call it? Navigating the motorcycle.
And speaking of not wearing a helmet, which is another
Robbie.
story. Yes, Dr. Rabinovich presenting for his shift with no helmet on, which gets pointed out by the Jewish grandma who burns her leg. He somehow tells her that he is going on sabbatical while he's treating her burn. And the ER nurse tells the patient, oh yes, he's going on a 3-month motorcycle ride. And she learns that he doesn't wear a helmet. How does she know that? How does she know he doesn't wear a helmet?
Oh, she doesn't know about the helmet. She just says, what are you, 50 years old riding a motorcycle? Pathetic. And he says 50-ish, ish.
That's right. All right. I was just worried about him not wearing a helmet. I guess Jewish grandma wasn't that worried. She didn't know about that.
She doesn't even know about the no helmet. God forbid she knew.
But I think that is foreshadowing for him perhaps deciding not to go on his sabbatical after he sees the motorcyclist whose brain is exposed and is no longer alive. maybe he will decide to stay in the ER, because how can you have the Pitt without Dr. Robbie? You can't. He's going to come back.
I have a darker theory of this, that he's going to cut out. It's going to be like the end of the season, and he's going to cut out and be like, I guess that's it, guys. And the shift is going to end, and he's going to be saying goodbye. And then they'll be like, he leaves the ER, and then we're like wrapping everything up in like the season finale. And then like we have someone coming in.
Oh, God.
And it's him with a motorcycle accident. And that's end of season. And then we have to see what happens next season.
Please no. Please no, Victor.
Robbie, please wear the helmet at least.
And I also forget that this show is one day. So I'm thinking he's no longer going on sabbatical, but still he's finishing out his shift, which is this season. So, okay.
It's only hours. It is the whole time.
It just seems like half my life I've been watching this or living it, really.
Well, that's more like it. That does feel like, Groundhog's Day, like we said last week. So so this Asian couple comes in, and never heard of this. Maybe you have, but this paralysis he has, at first they obviously think it's because of the accident, the person who is driving, the husband of the couple, and then he is experiencing paralysis, and it turns out it's because his potassium level has crashed.
Yes, they get his labs back, and his potassium is like 1.7 or something along those lines, which is profoundly low. And he does not have a spine injury to explain his paralysis. So they have diagnosed him with hypokalemic periodic paralysis. So they treat him with potassium, and he slowly starts to be able to talk. He hasn't been able to move his arms or legs yet, but he's kind of slowly getting better with the potassium. Something I've never seen, in fact. And as this is happening, his wife, of course, is in the trauma bay watching over everyone, and she's presumably fine. She was also in the car, but she says she doesn't want an exam. I'm good to go. And then, of course, something's wrong with her. She passes out, and they do a quick ultrasound, a fast exam, and they see that she has potentially ruptured her spleen, and she's hypotensive, and they rush her off to the emergency room. Rush her off to the operating room, excuse me. So now we have two major problems on our hands.
Yeah, and of course, just as the husband's coming to, first of all, it's interesting that the wife, first of all, is saying that, we were fighting right before this happened. I don't want those terrible things we said to each other to be the, last conversation we had. And then she collapses, and then he comes to, and he's like, oh my God, we were fighting all day, and she worked so hard for this. So it's interesting to have this duality, dual perspective on this whole event. And then he wants to record something to tell her, because he doesn't want that to be the last thing that she hears from him either. So all of that's very sweet. But I also like this thing he says where he goes like, this is how it goes. And they're like, what goes? And he says, all these things in our lives, and this is probably a lesson for all of us. I guess the show is always trying to make us better people, which, by the way, it's kind of like an after-school special. Like I said this to you already. But I got to say, if you have a show where you are trying to make people better, you know what? I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing to have on TV on a weekly basis, but he basically has this opinion of saying that everything matters so much, and then you're in a situation like this and you realize, wow, this is what really matters. So good for them for making this point. And it is, like you do think about that all the time. Like I think about this all the time, that God forbid something would happen to me. And, if I've had a fight with my daughter or something, I'm like, do I want that to be the last conversation we had?
Yeah, it's good that he tries to make amends, because he's worried that she is not going to potentially come out of surgery to even see this video. And to your point about the show trying to pass on a positive message, the level of empathy that all of these ER providers have for their patients is also fairly heightened. In real life, you just don't have time to think about the consequences of how these problems are affecting the patients and their families. For the most part, in the ER, you're going. There's too many things to do. You got to get through your to-do list. But at the same time, it's nice to see that these people truly care about what is happening to their patients.
I give the show credit, by the way, for not being Pollyannish about this either, because you do have, for example, Santos, who we've seen multiple times now, is obsessed with the characters if she thinks that they're dealing with some kind of abuse, or suicide has been the two things that trigger her the most. But then you see her being very cavalier on other people's cases when it doesn't necessarily hit her sweet spots. Or, for example, people making a death pool last season, which we're seeing again, and we got a code black coming in. So let's make up another grid. So there is some gallows humor, to say the least. And also when you think about last season where the show at first is like, we're really stepping up our game and we're going to like step up and save these people's lives. And by the end, they're like, doing like ad hoc surgery using like equipment that they could grab because they're like, yeehaw, it's like the thrill of, being in trauma basically, or being in the ER when something really horrible is happening. So I think the show isn't just purely like, and these people are all angels. Like they all have their own flaws. And some of these people should, like, for example, wait for the operating room to make a decision when Robbie is maybe the biggest culprit of it being like, no, we could relocate his shoulder. We could do that here. No, we could do it. So I think it shows both sides of it. Although I think overall the show as a philosophy thing, I think is I think it's not only speaking to us as potential patients or people who may have to deal with these things in the future. I think it's also speaking in a way to doctors themselves to ask them to, or medical providers to be more empathetic.
Yes, I think we all should take a moment and think about how everyone's problems affects their families and their friends, and take a moment to think about what you're doing before you move on, which is hard in this fast-paced world of medicine.
And along the lines of that, part of the trigger for the husband to record this is seeing this breakup that's happening between the father of that girl who they thought might have been an abusive parent and his girlfriend, and how they break up. Independence Day, right? She's like, happy Independence Day. She's not with him anymore. But although that's kind of funny, and Santos gets a little thrill from seeing this, this guy does present as a real jerk, by the way. So it's like he's apparently not abusive to his daughter, but seems to be.
He's verbally abusive to his girlfriend.
Yes.
And he's acting like a real jerk when he walks into the ER, yelling and screaming. So good for her for being independent.
Yeah, I think everybody was happy to see her break up with this guy. And some of those tender moments I mentioned here. First of all, I loved the dads commiserating over this one kid who's shoved these beads up his nose, and the three dads coming together, Langdon, of course, and this other new father, I don't know if he's a doctor or
he's a nurse practitioner.
Right. And he's in medical school, right? Is he wants to become a doctor? Or
no, he's an NP. So he was a nurse who then got more education to become an NP, nurse practitioner.
Okay. And
like me.
Like you.
But different.
Like you, but different.
We don't have to go into that. Yes. So both of them are sharing in the joy of trying to get the foreign bodies out of this presumably 5-year-old's nose. He's got a VR headset. He's playing games. They've numbed up his nose, and they go in there and they pull a bead out of each nostril, and they kind of share in that. And they're all kind of sympathizing with that because the nurse practitioner is a new dad, as is Langdon, as is, of course, the father of the child who's got that coming out of his nose. I once had a patient who came into the ER when years ago we had to rotate to an ER that was a freestanding ER. So we had to see pediatric patients. And a 3-year-old came in with popcorn kernels up the nose. And the ER doctor and I, who normally deal with adults, were like, we had no support services there. It's like, you got to figure it out on your own because it's kind of hard to get specialists to come in. We did fail miserably in getting the kernels out of this kid's nose. And we had to have the ENT doctor come in and put a scope up there.
Have you ever seen this contraption they have there with the balloon?
We actually use that sort of contraption to take clots out of people's arteries in their leg. So not specifically for the nose have I seen it, but same idea for plucking a clot out of an artery. It's a good idea. I wish I had tried that for the popcorn kernels, although the beads have holes in them, so that makes it easier.
And one more touching moment here. This is probably the most heavy-handed in the show, but very good to reference tragedy that happened in this actual area around Pittsburgh.
The Tree of Life shooting.
Right. Mrs. Kovalenko, I was trying to remember her name, that she's actually a survivor of the Tree of Life shooting, or she arrived right after the shooting occurred. And, it's very interesting when you see this, which is often the case with these old generations of people who are, specifically her being Jewish, but I mean, my parents are similar with their own ethnic affinities, that she says, oh, you're Jewish, to Dr. Rob. She's all excited about this because he knows the name of the teapot that she burned herself on. Turns out she has PTSD from hearing these firecrackers, remembering, of course, the shooting of that horrible shooting at Tree of Life. And of course, and not of course, but also later when the Muslim nurse is wrapping her leg, She says thank you to her, like thank you to
A collective thank you.
for all, since this woman represents the entire Muslim community, but it does bring up the fact that the Muslim community did stand up for the Jewish community in this area when this happened, and it does once again modeling, an ideal that hopefully we can get to. That when you think about this really ugly anti-Jewish and Palestinian battle or fight that's occurring right now, that these communities can come together in times of tragedy, and hopefully not only in times of tragedy. Have you ever seen a burn like this before? It looks like it was like a giant blister that popped, right?
Yeah, I have seen burns like that. He debrides it and dresses it and sends her out. One of the first patients I ever saw as a student had been in a car fire. I was in a burn unit in Connecticut, and this man had burns all over his body. It was very traumatic. I didn't get to have a cool conversation with him like he does with the Jewish grandma.
And as the episode wraps up, like I mentioned before, they're going to put a betting board up to see, just like they did at the last season when things started really getting chaotic there at the hospital, because apparently an adjacent hospital has called a code black. Is that an official term, code black?
I haven't heard that term, but I might be not completely up to date with all the terms. Apparently, they can't take any more patients at this hospital because there's something wrong at the hospital. We don't know what. Whether it's a power outage or an electrical problem or the doctors didn't show up for work. They mentioned that. I'm not sure if they were joking about that, but now all of the patients that were meant to go to that hospital are now being transported to the Pitt. So here comes our next disaster for next episode.
Yeah, things are going to start to escalate now that there's a...
Yeah, and you thought it was just fireworks. So now it's going to be fireworks plus the volume of patients from this other hospital that can't function.
That's my assumption here too, is that, this is going to be just, this code black is just going to increase the volume there, and then something catastrophic is going to happen. We've had hints now multiple times. They talked to Louis, right? The guy who's getting the fluid drained from his body. And he's like, oh, so tell me about that story. You met the people. I guess there's a famous family that sets off all the fireworks in Pittsburgh. And so once again, they're hinting multiple times, bringing up like, oh, I was on the field. I met that family. And it's the 4th of July. So, and I know that there's been in the past, historically, there have been like times where the fireworks will all detonate at the same time. And, dozens of people all get injured, when something like that happens. So you can imagine something like that happening. And
I know what it's going to be. It's going to be the fireworks family meets the racing family. And there's going to be firework injuries and mixing of pills, and everyone's going to be a mess.
It could be they're setting it off and they took the wrong pills. They could be at the event and they all get burned. And we've already seen a lot of debreeding, so there could be even much more debreeding. This could be a season of debreeding.
They're going to be hypotensive from beta blockers, and they're going to be burned.
That's more to look forward to. Lots of flesh burns. So it's still dangling here. Baby Jane, what's up with her? Still don't know. This deaf woman who now they're going to start communicating with, obviously is going to be important. She's been hanging around for multiple episodes. What's that setting up? I have no idea. This Asian wife, will she survive? Do you think we're going to see this couple again next week?
I have a feeling we are. They got to her right away after she collapsed and she's in the operating room. So I think they're going to save her, and I think he's going to recover from his paralysis. And I'm very good at predicting the show, Victor, as you just pointed out.
I know. This Lothario guy who complains that he can't sit down because it makes his butt hurt. So he's he's trying to flirt with McKay every time he sees her in the hallway, dance with her and everything. And meanwhile, there's another guy right next door being like, hey, save a dance for me. He's also flirting with McKay. McKay does not seem to be comfortable with all this attention she's getting all of a sudden. But at least she doesn't have her transponder. What do you call that thing that you wear?
The ankle bracelet. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure what these two characters have anything to do with progression of the show. He can't sit down because his butt hurts. We're not sure why. Stay tuned for next episode.
Exactly. I mean, they've introduced the character now, so something's going to happen with them. Because I was like, well, what's his story?
I know. He's going to have cardiac arrest.
Well, that would be kind of
unrelated to his pain sitting down.
It's got to be more interesting than that.
I don't know.
And Louis, of course, right at the end, he's like in a lot of pain. He wants to get his tooth taken care of. And it seems like they're building up to something there too.
Yes. What's going to happen to him? And my prediction is he is obviously a chronic drinker. They've pulled out all the fluid from his belly and he hasn't had a drink in a while because he seems to have been in the ER for a little while. So he's going to go into DTs and start seizing in the next episode.
And the last character that we need that's still dangling in the plot that, of course, they're seeding for the future is this diabetic. He came in for like one scene last week. He just passed out. And Dr. Landon smelled ketones and knew right away that it had to be diabetic shock. And then we see him now. He's recovering because he's getting his insulin. His daughter is there now. And the only payoff to this is that the two doctors are...
Dr. Javadi and the medical student are going back and forth giving the treatment algorithm of this DKA patient to the attendings, and they're competing for getting the answers right.
I love the teenage daughter being like, what?
as if it's these two physicians explaining the problem to the patient's family. No, they're explaining it to the attending to show off.
Yeah. And of course, that's going to pay off. There's going to be, in some ways that not only this competition that Javadi might not be the smartest person in the room anymore, but maybe motivating her to maybe want to compete for that position rather than staying in ER. Although that's, to partially to get at her mom. That's the decision she's making at this moment.
Yeah, I don't think she's meant for surgery. I think she wants to be an ER physician.
But I assume this diabetic patient is not only here for this particular scene. There's got to be something to this guy. There's got to be some payoff to this character at some point.
I don't think there's any payoff. I think it's just to show them competing to be the smartest.
I don't know. You bring this guy in for like 2 scenes. It seems like he's probably going to be...
I mean, not every ER patient's going to lead to something super interesting. Some patients just have a problem and get better and go home.
I'm talking about a TV show. I'm not talking about the actual ER. I agree with you in general, but I'm talking about as a TV show.
I am looking at this from a medical professional's perspective. Everything can't turn into a zebra, Victor.
But that's how TV works. So that's what you're here for, to have the medical perspective. I'm here to talk about the story construction perspective.
Fine.
All right. And that's where we leave things for next week. So thank you again for the conversation.
And please don't delete this podcast, Victor, because we can't possibly talk about the show again. Until next week.
What if we take a third take for the same conversation?
Our conversation was different, though.
It was completely different, actually. So that was actually a little experiment here. Interesting.
See you next week.
Thanks again, everybody.